All right. Well, welcome to another episode of the Rest and Recovery Podcast. With me is Mr. Lex Robinson, executive leader and mindset coach. And Lex, appreciate you taking some time to join me and talking about mindset, which when we talk about here on the podcast, one of the four pillars. Get into.
Absolutely.
But just I did a super high level introduction, but just give a little background about yourself and.
Sure. So I'll say there's my day job and then there's what I love doing, right? So my day job, I'm a cybersecurity executive, which means I've spent about 30 years in technology, and my focus now is on security for applications and systems and networks on a day-to-day basis. For my real life, what I actually enjoy doing is executive coaching, and I do a lot of high flow and peak performance training for individuals. Currently, mostly as a part of the Iron Council with Ryan Mickler, who I know that you know, but I do some of that on my own. I do some speaking on these topics as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into some of those ways to kind of connect with you on the coaching aspect, and I'm sure the collaboration you have with Ryan. On mindset, I mentioned the four pillars. What I talk about here on rest and recovery, and the things that support that are sleep, kind of obvious, mindset, fitness, and nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes mindset, I put it in that order, thinking, sleep is something you can own, but mindset really is the kind of the foundational element that's overlooked, I think, a lot of times.
Yeah. I think it underlies how we approach everything that we do, how we think about life in general, how we think about ourselves in general. And when you say mindset, and when I think about rest and recovery, there's two particular mindsets that I think come to mind for me in the way that I approach it. One is fairly standard, and that's living with a growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
That no matter where you are, there's always opportunity for expansion. There's always opportunity for growth. And that to stay in that place is what really facilitates post-traumatic growth. It facilitates just being able to overcome difficulties in life. Obviously, sleep is a huge part of being able to maintain that mindset.
Yeah.
And so that leads me into a second one, which is a little bit a part of what I teach in one of my programs, which is, and I learned this from others, from people that coach me, is the idea of the grit to recover.
Okay.
Having a mindset that you understand when you're not working at your best, and when you notice those things, you're going to take the time to actually do what your podcast is talking about, which is to rest, recover, put yourself in a position to perform at your best later on. And if you don't really go into life with that mindset of understanding who you are, how you feel, etc., you can't really even apply that mindset, or maybe it's just even a core thinking principle more so than a mindset. Having that grit and understanding that this is a normal part of life, and what is it, a good third of our lives, you might as well make it high quality. Right. So I think committing to that and having the commitment to that, setting boundaries, all that type of mindset to take care of yourself is just critical as a foundation.
Sure. Yeah, I haven't heard it put that way. I like the grit to recover. I like the framing of that, and using that term framing seems like a word around mindset to use, like on whether your growth or I guess whatever the negative side of a mindset might be.
Yeah. So and I like it too, and I call it the grit to recover because I deal and work mostly with men, as you know, and men's movement, I think pushes more towards the, just work hard until you collapse mentality. I'm just going
100%.
I'm going to push harder. I'm going to push harder. I'm going to push harder. I understand the intention. But I think if we don't teach people that there is a limit at which you get diminishing returns, and being smart enough and having the grit to be able to say, no, I'm now going to pull back and I'm going to stop. I'm going to go on a vacation. I'm going to take a nap. Even like lots of people are like, oh my God, you take naps every single day. And that's really where that frame of mind comes from for me. It's somewhat of a reaction to what I see being pushed out, and a lot of what the people that I talk to struggle. I just got to work harder. I just got to do
Yeah.
that. Ease up a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so good. I mean, it really resonates with me. I mean, kind of the basis of why I've even started the podcast as well is that, like, right in line with what you're saying, and that, there's definitely a place for that get her done mentality,
Absolutely.
no F's given or whatever when you're
Right.
doing the work. But like, the work isn't going to produce the fruit. You're not going to get the juice out of the squeeze if you're not
Exactly.
doing the recovery element.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a critical part of, obviously it's a critical part of a lot of what I teach when it comes to high flow and productivity, right? It's
Yeah.
flow literally as a cycle, as a studied cycle, includes recovery. It includes release. There's a recovery, there's a struggle to start or get into a thing, there's a release and relaxing into it, and then there's flow,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is super cognitive, high function. You're burning a lot of resources, you're really into the thing. And when you come out of that, you need to slow down. You have to let your brain and the chemicals in your brain, the neurochemistry, realign itself and reset itself so that you can go back into high performance again later on. Otherwise it just does not work. That's where burnout comes from. All that inability to perform at the level that you really want to.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many rabbit holes I'd like to go down. So I'm trying to think of so we can take it one of two ways. What are the skills, or what are the impediments or barriers to what we're talking about? And so I'll leave it up to you on which we'll cover both, hopefully. But
Wow. So a barrier to that is your ability to notice how you feel.
mhm.
Um, I'll I'll reuse this word of frame. A lot of times we have a tendency to separate what we think is our mind from our physical being, and we don't really pay attention to that. And one of the things that I've found super functional at is a skill is to be able to understand how your body physically feels, and understand that as a trigger, a pre-trigger, a pre-notification, things are going downhill.
Mhm.
You-
Yeah.
the simplest skill to develop is if you're working, and people hit flow states all the time and they notice them. One of the things to do when you notice that you're in a flow state, you're actually probably already coming back out. So stop. So that's like a skill to develop, to notice where you are, to be present, which we think of is like this big woo-woo thing a
Right.
lot of times, right? Oh, go
Right.
live in now. And it's like, no, just pay attention to what's going on with yourself, your body, your environment. In that case, when you notice that you've been in this highly productive state, again, you're probably coming out. So now it's time to wind it down and stop. Um, I think it's probably one of the big ones. One of the other things I'm a big proponent of, and this came out of some research I did earlier this year for the Flow Research Collective on post-traumatic growth. And this is and I think we talked about this before a little bit. In short, it's called nsdr, non-sleep deep rest. And that may be a topic you've even covered before, which is essentially the practice of just body scanning. Sit down, lay down, relax, start at the top of your head. Easy for me since there's no hair there. And literally sense with your eyes closed, how does that feel? Move to your ears, move to your eyes, try to sense how they are, what they feel like, and scan your whole body this way. And what you're doing by practicing it on a regular basis is you're putting how your body feels at the forefront of your mind. And then when you begin to marry what you notice more often with what's actually happening,
Yeah.
your mind will help you put together, oh, hey, this is all this tension right here probably means slow down,
Yep.
take a break. Um, anything like that at all that I think just puts you more in tune between your mind and physically how you're feeling, has to come to the top, because otherwise you're not really present, I guess is
Yeah.
the way to put it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I like how you pointed to the shoulder, because, like, so much of our tension and stress comes up in that area. There's other correlations talking about knowing your body. And that's where I'm coming from a functional health perspective, more from the physiology standpoint too, in that interconnection point, and understanding where certain parts of your own body are indicator lights on the dashboard that
Yeah,
correlate to your mental emotional.
Yeah. We get too often. This is another men thing, and I'll pick on men. Like we hear the word feeling in feelings and think it's all emotional based. I'm like, no, like literal physical feeling drives emotional state as well.
Yeah.
Um, men's health in particular, when you think about um, heart trouble, heart attacks, if you feel anxiety here all the time, you're putting that into yourself and not noticing it and not releasing and not letting go for your own health. And just, you're just killing yourself faster
Yeah. Yeah.
by not paying attention to these things. And that's when you don't push through. That's when you have to notice and have that grit to recover, have that grit to back off and say, I'm at a limit. I did this just anecdotally. Every Friday I go fencing with my son who's 17. We did it last night. But a week ago Friday, I ran into this. Now that I'm 55, I did my one-on-one lesson, which is 30 minutes. I fenced a 14-year-old who obviously has more energy than me, a 15-year-old, and then my son who was 17. And by the end, I literally had to just stop early because
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm an hour into this kind of nonstop. And if I hadn't recognized that limit, I stopped and took a look at my watch. I'm like, okay, that's a heart rate of 160. That's a little much for 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I was gassed. I had to lay out on the floor. And I talked to my son about it later and I said, look, that's a limit for me. I can't, I couldn't really finish the match with him as a result of that. But I think it's important to begin to notice that, and then you can make adjustments. I need to make adjustments, obviously, in my own endurance and strength training and how I'm going about it to continue to do that.
Yeah.
That level. And if I don't do it, and the reason I'm pointing to myself is because I don't want to put it on other people and preach but not do. Like if I don't take action on that now, well, then I'm putting myself at risk. And because I didn't take breaks between, I didn't rest, I didn't stop, I just did one and another and another and another, and it's
Yeah.
just not healthy at all.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things with that, and knowing your limits, and um, we're talking about barriers. I think for me, you mentioned fencing. I'm a runner. Knowing when to kind of taper, maybe not go as far as you intended, and not letting, uh, candidly for me, my pride get
Yeah.
in the way, because
Yeah.
on the piece of paper it says I'm
Yeah.
supposed to do X,
Yeah.
and my physiology's not there right then, and it's like this weird tension, like knowing when to push right through,
Yeah.
or throttle back and being like survive another day, because like good is better. Good
Yeah.
is good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's certainly better than death in
Right.
my case, not to be overly dramatic about it. And you're so right. Like pride is such a huge, huge detriment sometimes. I won't say always. I'm a proponent of saying you should take pride in what you're doing and in your work.
Yes.
And in my case, I mean, I'll fully admit I hate with a passion when my son can beat me. So it's a lot more like I don't like that. I would say, look, I've got to stop. I can't continue to compete with you
Sure.
because I wanted to, like, I never want to have to admit that, oh, maybe my son's stronger than I am at this point, or a little quicker, or a little faster. And pride is it's kind of a double-edged sword,
Yeah.
right? So enough pride to push yourself to improve, to notice, but not so much that you just slam your head into a brick wall over and over. There's a lot of balance, which isn't one of my favorite words in there, but
Yep. Yep.
you do have to measure that for yourself, and it is different for everyone. I think that's another key to rest and recovery that I think is worth bringing up. Right? You hear a lot of let's just name names like a Tony Robbins of the world, or some other successful people. Well, I sleep 4 hours a night. I sleep 4.5 hours a night. And I think people get the idea that, well, that means that they should
Right.
only do that. Number one, I don't believe people when they say that. Number two, maybe that works for them, but that doesn't mean it works for you. And again, back to understanding your physiology. If you're exhausted and tired, you did not sleep enough.
Yep.
It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
It's really that simple, and you don't need to overthink it. So I push back against a lot of that. Or if you see a lot of motivational stuff. People are up at 4, they're up at 4:30 in the morning, but what they're not telling you is the time they went to bed,
Exactly.
which was to enable them to get up at 4 in the morning. And so people only, you kind of get half the story. And yeah, if you want to be super productive, it's great to be up early in the morning. There's less distractions. You can get right into it.
Yep.
There's science from the study of flow that says, you're pretty close to flow state, um, neurochemically and with your brain waves when you wake up, that you can get up and be really productive,
Yeah.
office work, writing. Um, but that doesn't mean you can stay up till midnight and sleep for 4 hours and function this way. So you have to realize your conditions are different. Like we talked earlier, you have kids, I have kids. The reality is, no, I don't get to bed at 9:30 every night, and I'm able to get up early because I'm living my life. I'm doing those things. And maybe grace is another mindset or mentality you have to bear for yourself
Yeah.
in terms of all of this,
And then,
that people consider enough.
for me in hindsight, you mentioned the 4 hours. That's kind of what got me in the hot mess. And it started out as a joke. It's not really funny. Is I don't remember my 30s because I spent nearly that entire decade doing all the things, maxing out, right?
Yeah.
And I don't have memories of my kids. So what value was all that activity? And I mentioned pride because it's like, am I chasing or pursuing something? Right. And as a father, we need to be physical. We need to be strong. We need to develop strength and endurance. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But at the time, I personally was chasing, the glory days, as Bruce Springsteen
Oh
would
yeah.
say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And coupled with my career path, taking off in a high po program, and then having 3 kids who didn't sleep.
Yeah.
So for me, I've come up with the term total life load. Is like you have to account what that is for you in all the domains of your life and figure out where you are. To me, that's the word, quote unquote balance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And really discerning where you are, and then relative, and it's a moving target because it's life.
Yeah.
But that's where lately where I've been is just trying to evaluate that, and even looking back.
Yeah. I no, I appreciate that. And I've been through those phases of life myself. And I think I think between the two of us, we can begin to mature that whole balance conversation really to one about rhythm.
Hmm.
There are natural rhythms, sleep in particular. People think of the circadian rhythm as associated to sleep, but we have to understand that's a 24-hour cycle, energy levels up and down, that moves throughout the day. It's not just when you're asleep. And
Right.
living in and so here's a phrase a lot of people don't like: to go with the flow, which if used inappropriately sounds like, well, I'm going to go burn one off and chill out and not do anything and let the world be whatever it is.
Yeah, that are being apathetic, right? Just like,
Right. It's not right. It's not that, for sure. It's really about understanding your own natural rhythm,
mhm,
again, which you have to be in touch with. There are times, my high energy times are likely different than yours, likely different than any other listener that will hear this today. But when you understand your own cycle of energy, high energy versus low energy, you can now live in a rhythm with those things, and you tie the important, highly productive moments, or let's even say having fun moments
right,
with your family, to the high energy times, because who wants to hang out with dad who's half asleep and bored and not really into the thing.
right.
And and that's another word people don't like for some reason. I think we get stuck into this stoic mentality, thinking that the stoics never had any fun.
Hmm.
Point of stoicism was to live a life of joy. Joy sounds like a lot of fun to me. And fun, I think, as people look at it, if you wanted to define it, fun for most people is when you kind of lose sense of time doing something you enjoy with others. And
Yeah,
that's just super healthy,
yeah.
really.
And it's really, I mean, yeah, and that's really like, the pursuit of fulfilled life,
Yeah,
really, of finding those moments.
absolutely.
You
Absolutely. And we just ignore it to our peril. I think having more fun, I'll always tie it back to like kind of my sweet spot in the flow space. I call it the flow glow. Anybody who really studies flow would be like, what? Shut up, don't say it that way.
Yeah.
But because it's not scientific and it's not an exacting thing. But I refer to it as that because it has its own hangover effect. Like the more fun you're having, the better you actually feel when you're going to go to bed that night or when you wake up the next morning. And the more often that you're in flow and in that productive state and feeling good about things, it just feeds on itself.
Yeah. Kind of inertia.
Right.
Yeah.
Just like negative self-talk can drive you downwards, the idea of flow can help drive you upwards. That experience is just a huge, huge impact over time. A little bit can get you a couple days of feeling pretty good about something. So
Yeah.
it's a big, big deal.
Yeah. And, we're kind of, I'll oversimplify what you're kind of speaking to is that kind of self-awareness.
Yeah. Yeah.
That, I mean, it's a kind of overused term, but I mean, it's a valid one. And I think, another word to go with that would be almost acknowledgement, acknowledging how you're responding to those moments, so that you don't uh, spiral into that negative self-criticism kind of thing and just be like, okay, you're at the end of a particular cycle. You mentioned it earlier, you're at the end of a flow state. If you've acknowledged it, then you're probably coming out of it. So there's that hangover word you used of like,
Yeah.
when you come out of that, you're going to be tired or a lull or whatever. And that's part of the cycle that I have often self-criticized myself. Like, why aren't I, and men certainly can do that.
Yeah. Well, we don't teach ourselves or talk about enough things like neurobiology or biology because it sounds like this really crappy high school class that I had to take and I want to pay attention to, right? But the reality is that there are biological limits that are different for each of us, physically and our strength and our endurance, and neurobiologically it's the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And whether you or I or anyone else pays attention to it or not, it will have its impact. And it just behooves us to actually notice, acknowledge, oh, I can't even think straight right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably not the time to go give a presentation to your leadership team on your program you want to run. Right. So, because you're not going to do a good job. If I was super exhausted and tired and not with it, I would be like, Scott, let's wait. Let's not try to record something because my brain's not in it. I can't cognitively do it. And it's not a fault. It's a physical, biological, or neurobiological limitation that we personally have nothing to do with, in a sense.
Yeah.
Right. And
That's so good. And I'd like to ask your thoughts on the follow on the acknowledgement and like the skill after that I think many people fall down on is in the communication of that we don't, even if we recognize it,
yeah,
get the words out of our mouth to communicate to our family members that like, I need a moment. Because I know
yeah,
where I've not been healthy, it comes out in, as my wife would call, my Jersey tone, right? Not exactly the most kind, friendly
yeah.
method, right? So your thoughts on how we develop maybe that skill too, as completing the cycle, I'll call it.
Like the skill of noticing and communicating.
Yeah, yeah, that kind of have those healthy boundaries.
Yeah. So I think I'll start off with something that doesn't probably sound related, and that's taking notes
Hmm.
over time to notice when that occurs. So as we were talking about this idea of a cycle of energy, if you can note when you're high energy versus low energy as a pattern or a rhythm, and it will move some over time, but you probably already know for yourself. High energy times good, low energy times bad. If you can see that pattern, then you can begin to at least set in your mind, if let if I know I'm going to be exhausted by 9 o'clock on most days, 9 p.m., I can set the expectation with my wife, with the kids, with anybody else. Hey, 9 o'clock, I'm shutting down. I'm useless. But you kind of have to know that about yourself.
Yeah.
Um, that's a deeper one, I think, to work on over time. A simpler skill is just recognizing what you're doing and being where you are. I've talked about this with lots of people. If it's the end of your workday, take the time to put that to bed.
Mm.
So not bed, but it's the end of the day. I teach a practice of essentially taking the last hour of your day and saying, okay, what did and didn't get done? What needs to be set up for tomorrow? Did I put that on my calendar? Am I ready to go for tomorrow for work? Right? Kind of a little power down at the end of the day
Yep.
for the function of work itself, so that I don't have to take all of that with me as I drive home, walk home, or try to participate in dinner or something with the kids after that.
Yeah.
So I have to literally put in place a time block and develop the skills to do that on a regular basis, so that I don't carry it with me. And then when I get up the next day, I already see on my calendar, here's what it is, here's the priorities. And that was fed from the day before. So I don't have to think about it in between. And I think giving yourself that separation helps all of that as well. I didn't really address the communication part of it. Um, I'm probably not the best at the communication part because I'm such a I'm very blunt and straightforward to the point where sometimes it's going to be a detriment. And I will just tell people, "Look, stop." Like to your point of view, stop. I just give me half an hour.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
need 30 minutes. And I soften that with saying, Scott, I need 30 minutes because I want to pay attention to what
Mm.
I want to eat, and I can't do it. And to your point, men in particular don't like saying I can't do. Of course
Right.
I can handle it. But that's not wise, really. And
Mm.
I think men also appreciate wisdom. So I would say utilize that learning and wisdom, and be honest with people. And if you really do want to engage with them, maybe that's another part we can touch on that's a little tangent. You have to challenge yourself with the question, do I really even care about the people that I'm with, or what I'm talking and what I'm doing, and developing a skill of putting yourself in positions, which this will sound funny, only putting yourself, or as often as you can, into positions where that's where you want to be. And
Yeah.
that environment is the way that you want to be at, or where you want to be. Because if you're putting yourself consistently in positions where it's not like that, that begins to give you that grind, and then your behavior is worse, your attitudes are worse, your communication is worse. But I'm just for dead straight honest. I know my patterns. Do not bother me before 6:30 a.m. I'm useless. I can be up and I can be productive, but don't try to talk to me because it's a bad time. My wife and I have just set in place, maybe boundaries is better than skills for me in this. We've set in place, after 9 p.m., like I mentioned earlier, we don't talk about the dramatic stuff. We don't talk about stuff in bed. We don't talk about issues then. We don't, like, that communication
Yeah.
piece has to occur at a time when you're both there and aware and present. Phones have to be put away, that if you want to call that a skill. That whole structure and setup to communicate on purpose, I think, is probably where I would like.
Yeah. I I think that's excellent because, I think too often, and I'm guilty of it too, is you get in bed and, depending on life, we have kids in the teenage years and early college. So it's like, it's busy throughout till 9 o'clock at night, right?
Yeah,
Maybe later. And so when you're getting in bed with your spouse, that seems like the only time to have the conversation, or just before. And I think it's a great nuanced skill to know what to talk about when,
yeah.
because otherwise, like, you're going to get spun up just before you go to bed
Exactly.
on some stressful
Yeah,
situation, dealing with a kid or finances or fill in the blank, right? Whatever's going on. And then that's what is last on your mind and heart before you go to bed. So that's not going to really help you.
yeah. It doesn't, even if it's something positive,
Yeah.
because now you can be like overly stimulated even in a positive way where you just can't stop thinking about something. I guess the only twist I'll put on that is, we've gotten into the habit of talking about how do we want today to end. Like, that's actually a topic. Like, how do I want today to end? What would be an ideal ending to today? And if it was a stressful day, maybe it's she and I saying, what would be a great way for today to end? Let's go get some ice cream and sit on the porch and go to bed. Or maybe it's something else entirely, but like purposefully saying, what's the right ending to this day? Was it a great day and we just need to chill and relax? Was it a crappy day and we need to go get the ice cream
Yeah.
and that kind of thing? And it can sound a little goofy, but when you take that type of intentionality towards the end of your day, it's just a more peaceful ending.
Yeah.
And it's a more uplifting ending and it's a more relaxing one. Um, all that's predicated on paying attention and knowing yourself and knowing your partner. And the whole open communication of today was a crappy day, which I like to challenge with people a lot because this is a fault of mine. Um, I can judge a day, whether it's what I do corporately or what I'm doing in my business for myself. I can judge a day pretty harshly,
Yeah. Yeah.
like too harshly. Well, today was a crappy day. Why? Well, I'm not really sure. Well, when you're not really sure, this is gonna maybe upset some people. If you're not sure why it was a crappy day, it's because of yourself.
Right.
Right? Back to that whole mindset and
Mindset and
mentality we talked about
training and
at the
yeah,
beginning. Um, when I've yes, there are legitimately bad days. Bad things happen.
sure.
But if it's an average ordinary day, a few things got done. Why do I sit around? And I'll speak just to myself. Why would I sit around beating myself up because I didn't get from point A to point B maybe exactly the way I wanted to? Um, that's growth. If you have growth, if you have progress, um, we have to recognize that although we want everything immediately, it takes a little time. Maybe if you take a nap, maybe if you sleep on something overnight and a problem or an issue, you actually give your mind the opportunity to give you better solutions tomorrow than today. But if you get stuck in that, well, it was kind of a crappy day. Well, then find a reason to cheer up. It just sounds like I know how that sounds to a lot of people. It doesn't sound hard enough. It doesn't sound masculine enough. It doesn't sound whatever. No, find a reason to feel better because masculine doesn't mean being an asshole
Right.
or
Right.
being upset. Masculine means you're strong enough to deal with whatever is going on,
Yeah.
and prepared to deal with it in a way that you can do it with a smile on your face, relaxed, and you burn your way through it. That to me is powerful masculine that is just always pissed off or upset, or everything's terrible. Um, that's when you lead into what modern society has picked up on and just painted men with as a fool. Is like, well, all men are like this all the time.
Right.
No, no, we're not, but we're also not very practiced at enjoyment, for lack of a better
Yeah. Yeah. And
word.
the word that came to mind when we were talking was intensity. I think sometimes we think being masculine equals intensity all the time. And that's just not the case, right? That's like
Right.
constantly sprinting or doing one rep maxes all the time. You're going to break yourself.
Yeah.
Um, and you mentioned stoicism and the mischaracterization of that. To me, it's about self control and really understanding. And part of that isn't just controlling the circumstance, but understanding where you are in the circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so you can respond well and just be like, okay, this may not be the chance. To your point on the going to bed. Don't talk about heavy stuff. Well, there's other elements that are similar scenarios in life that this may not be the best time to engage with someone on something.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And honestly, we don't teach ourselves that way. I mean, I will agree with people that talk about our society in terms of men and masculinity and what it is. And we all tell like half stories or quarter stories. And we don't have a tendency to look at the whole picture.
Yep.
Much like we don't look at the whole picture of our health as a third of it is sleeping, and sleeping well makes you healthier. So do it. Like the holistic notion of all of it is missing, and we get so pointed on a thing, which is great for flow, but it's not great. I mean, you have to step back out of a thing to see
Yep.
now
Yeah.
too, right? So it has advantages and disadvantages, the things that I teach, to say, yeah, but there are times to not be there. There are times to be out, out here looking
Yeah.
at the so
That's really good. Goes back to, I think, what you were saying. I wrote down rhythms and seasons,
yeah, yeah,
knowing where you
yeah. There's whole seasons of life, and of course anybody that's listening to this that's younger might say, well, they're being patronizing. No, I used to think that too, right? But there are seasons and rhythms of life, and there are moments of life where you either mature or you don't in certain ways, and at certain points in life, if you really want the wisdom that comes later, you have to hit a lot of these other markers in rhythm kind of along the way. And some of those are your health and physical activity as a habit,
Mhm.
knowing yourself well enough that you know where you provide and add value to the world. That's what you can kind of feel good about. Another big one there, which is a huge impact on sleep, in my opinion, is the ability to forgive
Mm.
yourself and
Yeah.
others. And these are well studied, well researched ideas on learning how to do those things. By the time then you get to your 50s, that's when the magic of the brain can really flip on it, and now you gain the wisdom of these things over time. And that rhythm in and of itself is one that I don't think we teach enough or back out enough into. And so, high energy, obviously, when you're younger, there's a whole lot more energy going on there. And I'm probably off the topic of the general topic, but like if you were going to take risks, yeah, I'm going to encourage my son when he's now's when you do it because you have the energy to recover.
Right. Yeah, totally
Yeah.
agree.
And
I think back on my professional career and things like that, and my 30s, but like, investing in those seasons when you really don't have a lot of the burdens, that total life load that is outside of just yourself and
right.
maybe one or two other things, right? Invest in those times. Yeah, work till 9, 10 o'clock at night to develop the skill because that'll pay off in the long run.
Right.
And that's the same with everything is like whatever you're going to the fruit is born much later.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and so if you're experiencing a season that happened 1, 3, or 5, maybe longer years before that, um, whether it's the mindset or your physical health, that's a compounding interest. And that principle works positively and negatively, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. I mean, you simply won't unlock the capability of aging that you would normally unlock if you don't actually do those things.
Yeah.
And if you have never learned to forgive someone, I'll use that as an example. You don't rest well, you don't sleep well, you develop high anxiety, you hold on to bitterness, you hold on to anger. All of that stuff for you means you probably don't rest as well as you should.
Yep. 100%.
Certainly, then when you're older, you don't gain the wisdom of saying, oh, geez, how much cognitive energy did I burn being upset, angry about something for the last 20 years?
Yeah.
And people hold on to stuff even longer than that. They hold on to their trauma for a lifetime, and they don't kind of coach themselves out of those things to be able to relax and get to resting and understand their progress and that whole growth thing that we talked about at the beginning.
Mhm.
So for me, those are some of the key markers that I think are just huge for people as you age. I don't want to say get older anymore. Like, so as we age, and if you want to perform at your peak when you age, all those things matter. And then you kind of shrink them down into the day-to-day of any particular part of life. It's the same cycle, it just expands out and expands out and expands out. And a lot of that is awareness and wanting to pay attention to those things.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned a word that I think correlates to the post-traumatic growth mindset, which I think is a newer term that I've been hearing
Mhm.
around the PTSD side of things. And you mentioned
Right.
trauma. We all have it, uh, whether we want to admit it or not. There's things that we carry with us. Um,
Oh yeah.
touch on that as we kind of get close to closing out. That
Sure.
post-traumatic growth, what that is.
Yeah. And for me, it's I don't want to sound harsh, but yes, everyone experiences trauma. That doesn't make me special. And I think that people latch onto that because and I know how awful this sounds to others, but we can latch onto our trauma because it makes us special, it makes us unique, and we're very comfortable in gaining attention, in gaining sympathy, in gaining from the trauma itself. And the one thing that we don't do well is grow from trauma. So if we take that tactic, that trauma stays with us and we gain benefit from holding on to the trauma. Well, the benefit you really need to get out of trauma, which releases you into the rest of life, is what's useful from that?
Right.
What learn from that? And so when we talk about, what helps people, it's really easy to say journaling, but you have to go further, and just like a diary of angst is not helpful if you don't follow that up with the literal question and answer. What can I learn from that? What's useful from that I can take away to improve myself, my life, my existence? And write those things down, say, well, now what am I going to go do? And making a habit or a skill or a practice of that, and moving yourself away from just, well, I had this experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've all had really bad experiences, and some of us have chosen to grow from them, and some of us live with them. And that sounds really harsh to somebody who's lived with trauma for a long time. But then the challenge back is, if you want to stay there, you can stay there. I will let you stay there as a coach. I'm not a therapist. But if you want to move past it, well, then what's useful? What moves you? What moves you forward? We can throw the word grit in here too, like even grit to recover from trauma, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Courage to just say, I don't want to be that anymore. And all that stuff just leads to high anxiety, lack of sleep, lack of rest, lack of productivity. And then it just becomes a cycle. See, because I had this trauma.
Yep.
You go ahead, see, but I had this trauma. And that's the real negative thing that can go with that. So when I think post-traumatic growth, that's where I go the most. What's useful from.
Gotcha. I think that's really helpful. And yeah, I think of this quote I heard, actually, I think it was from Ryan's interview with Matthew McConaughey, where he says, we're all victims, but we choose to be victimized. And it's kind of this, we all have traumas, victim moments that are out of our control. But the framing of understanding the circumstance, what it really does mean, whether in that moment and then after the fact, where you had some time to kind of maybe see it differently, not because it's different, but like you were not emotionally charged in that moment.
Yeah.
Clearer eyes and mind to see it a little differently, and even maybe a little bit of empathy from the other person you're involved with, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. You made me think of a thing, and then gosh, because I can like go all day. You made me think of this idea of, when you were saying that, which I agree with. There is a skill or a way of being that I would call being able to relax into the unknown. Like, this is what experience and surviving things and challenging yourself really gives you, is I've had all of this stuff go wrong. I'm fine. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I'll be fine, because I can see I've already been through all this stuff.
Yeah.
And that ability, it's not even courage anymore. It's that first step of relaxing into, I don't really know. I'm not going to judge it. I don't really know how to feel about tomorrow. I'm not even there yet. That's actually what leads to being more adventurous,
That's
having
good.
more fun,
Yeah.
right? It's just relax into whatever it is. This is a huge story, and with multiple chapters and good days and bad days. And the moment you can step back and learn to just love it all for the experience of it, and relax into that, I just think all of the stuff, that's resting to me, because now you're just resting into life in a sense.
Yeah,
Just
you
make,
kind of lower the boom a little bit in life, and change the baseline of what you're capable of, creating that margin, I think, so
yeah,
you respond well.
yeah, yeah, feel good about stuff.
Hmm.
Like, that's what I'll tell you for myself and sleep and rest and recovery. When I don't feel good about myself, I don't sleep.
Yeah, there's so much to that. Yeah.
Like, I don't want to make it too simple. But that's really what it is. That's the stuff that keeps me up. I did this wrong, I did that wrong. Oh, you know what? It's okay.
Yeah.
Dragon's still in the woods, and I'm still going to go get it tomorrow. So enjoy it, and
Yeah.
learn to laugh. You have to laugh at yourself. All of those types of things, I think, are just critical.
Yeah. The skill of humor is probably a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, Lex, before we close things out, I do a bit of a hot seat, 3 questions, nothing too heavy, but how can folks find you and maybe even touch on the group that you've launched?
Sure. The easiest way is through the Viros Group. So that's just the virosgroup.com. People think it's virus, but it's actually VIROS group, the virosgroup.com. And what we're really doing there is focusing on teaching people what I'll call first principles of high flow and peak performance, things like clarity, like intentionality, um, personal ownership, challenge skill ratio, and trying to develop people in those regards. And we've really started that off. I've opened that product up, as we mentioned earlier, in conjunction with the Iron Council and Ryan Mickler's work. And so we have a group within there, which is where we started this work off, and it's going remarkably well. So if people want to find out more, they can go there. We got a blog, we got all the stuff, the YouTubes, the whatever, and all those kind of things. And everybody likes to consume ideas differently. So just you can hit up that website and it'll take yourself wherever you want to go.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So what are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? I'm actually reading, because I'm really terrible. So this will be a funny admission. This is the book that I'm reading right now.
1 million followers.
And I don't actually anticipate I'm going to get to 1 million followers, but I'm very good at coaching. I'm very good at my business. I'm very good at what I do, but I'm not necessarily that skilled with the social media. So I'm trying to teach myself, old dog, new tricks, because I want the message to get out there. Like your message is important. I want my message to get out there. Hey, we can do better. We can perform better. So that's what I'm currently reading, and I'm reading it and I'm going, oh, God, now I got to learn how to do this better and more frequently in the right way. So that's actually what I'm reading right now.
Cool. All right. What are you listening to right now, be it music or podcast?
This will sound like a completely selfish plug, but it is what I listen to on a regular basis. And I have a whole thing on Spotify for rest and recovery music. And that's actually what I listen to most days when I'm home. I've stopped kind of listening to music and podcasts while I was driving around. There is one other book, you know what? I'll pull it up because I want to give you the right name, because I actually listen to books more than I do podcasts.
Yeah.
And this current one, what's the right name of this one? It's called Effortless, which obviously matches what we're talking about.
Yes.
This is Greg McCown.
Yeah. Great book.
And he actually wrote, I'm going to say it wrong.
Essentialism.
Essentialism, yes. And this is kind of his follow-up to that. Talking a lot about some of the concepts we talked about today. Relax, release into what you're doing. So it's a fascinating read, and a lot of crossover ideas with what we've talked about today. So.
Great. Yeah. Essentialism I've read, Effortless not yet.
Yeah.
But it's definitely on my to-do list. All right, your go-to rest and recovery method.
Okay, I will tell you that there are there's what I do during the day, and then there's shutdown program at night. So throughout the day, I'm big into breathing and breath work. So I will do a 4-7-8 breath work if I'm feeling stressed out, to kind of pull myself back down and relax. I actually do breath work before big meetings. Several deep breaths, relax, and I consider that resting and relaxing into a thing. For me, my pattern is television off at 9. I actually have started wearing, here they are, just because I'm not crazy, right? My little
blockers.
Little blue blockers while I'm watching TV or on the computer at night, off at 9. I do hot shower before bed. Science behind that says if you give yourself a hot shower, it turns on your body's wanting to cool off mechanism.
Yep.
And it actually cools you down, and cooler is better for sleeping. And so I do those things, and this will sound goofy, but I don't sleep without my fan. So I prep all of those things, and then hopefully I'm out and done before 10 p.m. and then I'm generally around 6:30 or so.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, no, I can appreciate the fan. I didn't until I met my wife, and then she introduced me to it, and now I can't not sleep without some kind of white noise.
It's like an addiction in a sense, but
Yeah,
it's noise and it does cool things down. And I'm a big proponent of what the science says about sleep from that regard. Just a cooler environment, good and dark. I need new blinds as a result of that. But those are the things that that's my general pattern, at least for trying
great.
to.
Well, Lex, appreciate the conversation. I'm confident we could do this for another 2 hours, but we have
Oh,
other aspects of our life to live. So,
yeah, we do. So
but thank you so much for the time. It was very insightful, and appreciate you.
yeah, thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.